12 old Hollywood celebrities who lived a fake life. And Hollywood helped them do that. Rock Hudson. In the sun-drenched illusion factory of mid-century Hollywood, few stars radiated more masculine charm than Rock Hudson. Towering at 6'5", with a square jaw, deep voice, and easy grin, he was the epitome of the American leading man starring in romantic comedies with Doris Day, sweeping epics like Time's Giant Asterisk, and glossy melodramas that cemented his status as a heartthrob. Women wrote him thousands of fan letters. Men wanted to emulate him. But behind that flawless facade lived Roy Harold Scherer Jr., a quiet, introspective man who was gay in an era when that truth could annihilate a career and possibly land you in prison. From the moment Universal Pictures signed him in 1948, the studio began crafting a fiction. They changed his name to Rock Hudson. Strong, rugged, undeniably masculine. They assigned him a romantic publicist who orchestrated fake dates with starlets like Mamie Van Doren and Vera Miles, planting staged photos in Photoplay and Time's Modern Screen Asterisk. In 1955, under immense pressure, Hudson entered a sham marriage with Phyllis Gates, his agent's secretary. A union that lasted just 2 years but served its purpose. It reassured the public that Rock was normal. For decades, he lived a double life, attending lavish parties, accepting awards, smiling for cameras, while privately grieving lovers lost to secrecy and shame. It wasn't until 1985, when he was diagnosed with AIDS, that the truth finally surfaced. His publicist issued a terse statement, confirming both his illness and his sexuality. The revelation stunned America. But for those who knew him, it was a tragic confirmation of a life spent in exile from himself. Rock Hudson didn't die just from a virus. He died from decades of enforced silence, and in his final act of courage, he gave permission for others to live openly. Personal tragedy into a catalyst for change during the darkest years of the AIDS crisis. Marilyn Monroe. She was the most photographed woman in the world, yet few truly saw her. Born Norma Jean Mortensen in 1926, she spent her childhood shuffled between foster homes and orphanages, craving stability and love in a world that offered neither. When she signed with 20th Century Fox in the late 1940s, the studio didn't see the intelligent, sensitive woman who devoured Dostoevsky and studied acting with Lee Strasberg. They saw a body, a face, a marketable fantasy, and so they remade her. They bleached her mousy brown hair platinum blonde. They taught her to walk with a sway, to speak in a breathy whisper, to giggle like a child even when her soul was heavy. They renamed her Marilyn Monroe, a name that sounded like stardust and sin. The public adored the dumb blonde, but Marilyn hated the caricature. Offset, she read poetry, wrote journals filled with existential questions, and fought tirelessly for serious roles. In 1955, she defied the studio system by forming her own production company, Marilyn Monroe Productions, and enrolling in the Actors Studio in New York. She demanded respect, better scripts, creative control, and for that, she was punished. Fox suspended her repeatedly. Directors mocked her on set. The press painted her as difficult, unstable, ungrateful. But what they called diva behavior was really the desperate cry of a woman trying to reclaim her identity from an industry that only wanted her as a symbol. By the end, the strain was unbearable. She was exhausted not from fame, but from the relentless performance of being someone she wasn't. When she died alone in her Brentwood home in 1962, at just 36, the world mourned the icon. But the real tragedy was that Norma Jean never got to live as herself. Not fully, not freely. Her life was a masterpiece of illusion, painted over a canvas of pain. Tab Hunter. Before there was Elvis, Before there was James Dean, there was Tab Hunter, the original teen idol of the 1950s. With his tousled blonde hair, boyish grin, and wholesome charm, he became a sensation almost overnight. Warner Brothers signed him in 1950 and immediately set about crafting the perfect image, the clean-cut, all-American boy next door. Girls screamed his name at movie premieres. Magazines declared him the dream date of a generation. But Arthur Andrew Kelm, his real name, was living a lie. He was gay, and in the repressive climate of post-war America, that truth was dangerous. Warner Brothers knew it. His publicists knew it, and they worked tirelessly to suppress it. They arranged photo ops with actresses like Natalie Wood and Debbie Reynolds. They fed gossip columns, stories about his romances. They even banned him from being seen with certain friends who might raise eyebrows. Tab later described his life as living in a glass house, every move watched, every word scrutinized. He couldn't hold a man's hand in public, couldn't attend a gay bar, couldn't even mourn openly when lovers died. The pressure was suffocating. In 1957, he scored a #1 hit with Young Love, further cementing his heartthrob status. But the song felt like a cruel joke. He was young, yes, but his love had to remain hidden. Though he eventually left Warner Brothers and found more freedom in independent films, the damage was done. For years, he remained closeted, even after moving to Europe. It wasn't until his 2005 memoir, *Tab Hunter, Confidential*, that he finally told his full story, and in doing so, he gave voice to countless others who had lived and died in silence. Hattie McDaniel. In 1940, Hattie McDaniel made history. She became the first African American to win an Academy Award, honored for her role as Mammy in Time's Gone with the Wind*. Her performance was warm, witty, and dignified. A rare moment of humanity in a film that glorified the antebellum South. But the irony was crushing. On the night of the Oscars, held at the segregated Coconut Grove nightclub in Los Angeles, McDaniel was not allowed to sit with her white co-stars. Instead, she was seated at a small, isolated table at the back of the room, honored, yet segregated. Born in 1893, McDaniel was a multi-talented performer, singer, comedian, radio star long before Hollywood came calling. But the industry only saw one role for her: the maid, the mammy, the loyal servant. Over her career, she played variations of this character in over 300 films. She once famously said, "I'd rather play a maid than be one," a line that speaks volumes about the limited choices available to black actors in that era. She wasn't refusing dignity, she was choosing survival. Every role was a compromise, every paycheck a small victory in a system designed to erase her complexity. Off-screen, she was sharp, politically aware, and fiercely proud of her heritage. But on-screen, she was reduced to a stereotype. Her Oscar win was groundbreaking, yes, but it also highlighted the cruel paradox of black excellence in a racist industry. She could be celebrated, but only within the narrow confines of white imagination. Hattie McDaniel's life wasn't fake in the sense of deception, but it was inauthentic in the way Hollywood forced her to shrink herself, to mute her brilliance, to play the same role over and over, because the world refused to see her as anything more. Anthony Perkins. When Anthony Perkins stepped into the role of Norman Bates in Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho in 1960, he delivered one of the most haunting performances in cinema history. But few realized how deeply personal the role was. Perkins, sensitive, artistic, and quietly gay, had spent years trying to fit into the mold of the Hollywood leading man. Paramount Pictures signed him in the Progress, 1950, and pushed him into romantic roles. opposite stars like Audrey Hepburn in Time's friendly persuasion asterisk. He dated actresses publicly, posed for magazine covers with his arm around starlets, all while living in fear. Fear that his true self would be exposed. Fear that he'd be blacklisted. Fear that he'd lose everything. When he played Norman Bates, a man fractured by repression, haunted by his mother, torn between desire and guilt, many critics saw it as typecasting. But for Perkins, it was catharsis. He channeled his inner turmoil into the character, creating a portrait of psychological disintegration that felt terrifyingly real. Unfortunately, the role also typecast him for life. After Time's Psycho asterisk, he struggled to find serious work in America. He moved to Europe, made art films, tried to reinvent himself, but Hollywood wouldn't let him escape Norman Bates. In 1973, under social and professional pressure, he married photographer Barry Berenson. They had 2 sons. He lived a respectable public life, but privately, he remained gay. He never publicly came out. He died of AIDS-related complications in 1992, just as the epidemic was beginning to be acknowledged by the mainstream. His death was reported as complications from pneumonia. The truth was buried once again. Anthony Perkins gave one of cinema's greatest performances, but he never got to live his own truth on his own terms. Rita Hayworth. Born Margarita Carmen Cancino in 1980 to a Spanish father and Irish-American mother, Rita Hayworth began her career as a dancer in her family's vaudeville act. She was dark-haired, exotic, and fiercely talented. But when Columbia Pictures signed her in the early 1940s, they didn't want exotic. They wanted all-American. And so, they erased her. They dyed her hair a fiery red. They changed her last name to Hayworth, sounding more Anglo, less foreign. Most cruelly, they subjected her to painful electrolysis treatments to raise her hairline, giving her a more Caucasian forehead. They literally reshaped her face to fit a fantasy. The studio marketed her as the love goddess, a seductress who could make men weak with a glance. She starred in films like Time's Gilda Asterisk, where she sang "Put the Blame on Mame," while slowly removing a glove, an image that became iconic. But off-screen, Rita was trapped. She married 5 times, often to controlling men who saw her as a possession. Her studio dictated her roles, her image, even her personal life. When she tried to assert independence by leaving Columbia or choosing her own projects, they sued her. They called her ungrateful. They threatened her career. She once said, "Men go to bed with Gilda, but wake up with me." That line captures the heartbreak of her existence. The world worshipped a fantasy, but rejected the real woman beneath. She struggled with alcoholism, depression, and eventually early-onset Alzheimer's. By the end of her life, she was frail, forgotten by many. Living in a modest apartment, the love goddess had been reduced to a ghost, haunted not by fame, but by the erasure of her true self. Judy Garland. Few stories in Hollywood are as heartbreaking as that of Judy Garland. Signed by MGM at the age of 13, she was immediately thrust into a world that demanded perfection and punished vulnerability. The studio saw her incredible voice, her emotional depth, her ability to connect with audiences. But they also saw a body they needed to control. She was put on a brutal diet of chicken soup, black coffee, and cigarettes to suppress her appetite. Given amphetamines to stay awake during grueling 18-hour shooting days, given barbiturates to sleep at night. This wasn't care, it was chemical management. They called her the little hunchback, behind her back when exhaustion made her slump. They replaced her in films when she gained weight. They told her she was ugly, ungrateful, replaceable. And yet, she delivered. She sang "Over the Rainbow" with such yearning because she meant it. She wanted to go somewhere where she could just be Judy. Not Dorothy, not MGM's golden goose. Just a girl. But that girl never got to grow up safely. She married young, divorced often, and struggled with addiction for decades. Her later career was marked by comebacks and collapses, standing ovations and hospitalizations. She died alone in London in 1969 at the age of 47. Her funeral was packed with stars, but how many of them truly saw her? Judy Garland's life wasn't a lie in the sense of deception, but it was a life lived under constant surveillance, manipulation, and pressure to conform. She was never allowed to be imperfect, and in a town that worships youth and beauty, that's a death sentence. Britney Spears. Fast forward to the 21st century, and the machinery of control evolved but didn't disappear. Britney Spears exploded onto the scene in 1998 as America's innocent pop princess schoolgirl outfit, curly hair, bubblegum anthem, Baby One More Time. She was marketed as pure, wholesome, desirable, but safe. But Britney was a complex young woman from Louisiana, ambitious, artistic, determined to control her own career. As she grew older and tried to express her sexuality through music, fashion, relationships, the backlash was swift and brutal. She was called a slut, a disgrace, a fallen idol. Then, in 2007, under the weight of relentless media scrutiny, family pressure, and mental exhaustion, she cracked. She shaved her head, attacked a paparazzo's car with an umbrella, and instead of compassion, the world laughed. What followed was even more sinister: a conservatorship. For 13 years, her father, Jamie Spears, controlled every aspect of her life: her finances, her medical decisions, her work schedule, even her reproductive choices. She couldn't hire her own lawyer, couldn't choose her own therapist, couldn't say no to tours or performances. In 2021, she finally spoke out in a raw, emotional court testimony that shook the world. "I was in shock," she said. "I was traumatized." She revealed she was forced to work against her will, forced to take medication, forced to live a life that wasn't hers. Her voice, once the soundtrack of a generation, had been silenced. Not by scandal, but by systemic control. Britney's story is a modern echo of the old studio system. A star stripped of autonomy, packaged for consumption, and punished for wanting to be human. Her fight to end the conservatorship wasn't just legal, it was existential. It was about reclaiming her name, her body, her life. Montgomery Clift. He had the face of a fallen angel and the instincts of a poet. When Montgomery Clift arrived from Broadway in the late 1940s, he didn't fit the studio blueprint. He mumbled, he questioned, he wanted truth more than polish. Yet Hollywood tried to wrap him in cellophane public dates, carefully posed photo spreads, the promise of a quiet bachelor who just hadn't met the right girl. Clift, who loved men and women but trusted almost no one, kept his private life locked behind deadbolts of discretion. On screen, he redefined masculinity raw-nerved in A Place in the Sun, haunted in From Here to Eternity, stripped of heroic armor. Off-screen, the control never stopped. Publicity departments massaged rumors. Handlers steered him away from wrong friends. After the near-fatal car crash in 1956, the industry fixated on his altered face, not his blazing craft. The tragedy wasn't his beauty's erosion. It was the way a system built on appearances punished a man whose gift was naked honesty. Clift's rebellion was quiet, but it endures. He proved a leading man could be vulnerable without asking permission. Bette Davis. If the studio system was a fortress, Bette Davis was the battering ram. Warner Brothers wanted a glamorous workhorse who'd smile on cue. She wanted great roles and the freedom to choose them. When they handed her nice girl fluff, she sailed to London in 1936 and sued to break her contract. A heresy, in an era when studios owned your image, your time, your future. She lost the case but won the war. The films that followed Jezebel, Dark Victory, now Voyager, were steeped in the complicated women she demanded. Still, the machine kept pressing. Executives called her difficult. Gossip columns weaponized the word temperamental. What looked like diva defiance was labor action in lipstick. A woman insisting that talent, not compliance, should define her career. Davis aged on screen without apology, refused to soften her edges, and took roles that let women be ambitious, angry, even unlovable. In a town obsessed with pleasing everyone, she insisted on being someone and paid for it with headlines, suspensions, and endless battles. That's the real legend. Not the eyes, not the cigarettes, but the refusal to be packaged. Anna May Wong. She was born in Los Angeles, fluent in the rhythms of the city that pretended she didn't belong. Anna May Wong became Hollywood's first Chinese-American movie star, and its most elegant cautionary tale. Studios draped her in silk, cast her as the Dragon Lady or the Doomed Flower, and then barred her from romantic leads opposite white men because of anti-miscegenation taboos on screen. When MGM made The Good Earth in 1937, Wong campaigned for the lead and was told she could audition for the villain. She took her brilliance to Europe, where directors let her be modern, witty, alive. Back home, the roles shrank again. Servant, temptress, sacrifice. Reporters praised her exotic grace, a compliment with a cage inside it. She was confronting a gate that wouldn't open. She learned languages, toured stages, mastered radio, anything to keep creating when film said no. Her life exposes the hoax at the heart of the dream factory. It sells universality while policing who gets to be universal. Wong kept showing up anyway, writing a blueprint others would follow through the door. Dorothy Dandridge. She walked into the 1950s like a revelation. Magnetic, sly, devastatingly alive, Carmen Jones made Dorothy Dandridge the first black woman nominated for a Best Actress Oscar. And the studios should have built an empire around her. Instead, they offered scraps, nightclub singer, suffering lover, spectacle without interiority, because America still wanted black talent without black complexity. She was photographed as a goddess and treated as a risk. Producers gushed over her beauty and then whispered about market realities. Hotels booked her to headline and then barred her from the lobby pool. Tabloids invented scandals. Real love had to detour around contracts and stigma. Dandridge pushed back, choosing parts that suggested the woman beneath the shine, insisting on billing that recognized her stature, but a system that couldn't imagine a black woman as everything finally strangled the future she'd earned. Her death at 42 reads like a footnote in some histories. It isn't. It's a verdict on an industry that confuses progress with poster art. Dandridge didn't live a lie. She lived in a hall of mirrors that returned only fragments. And still, for a blazing moment, she made the mirror sing. The unseen truth. Why these lives matter. These stories are not isolated tragedies. They are symptoms of a system that has, for over a century, prioritized image over identity, profit over personhood, and illusion over truth. Hollywood didn't just create movies, it created myths. And to sustain those myths, real people were asked to disappear. Couldn't be gay. Marilyn Monroe couldn't be smart. Hattie McDaniel couldn't be anything but a maid. Anthony Perkins couldn't be vulnerable. Rita Hayworth couldn't be Latina. Judy Garland couldn't be tired. Britney Spears couldn't be unwell. The cost of fame was authenticity, and for many, the price was too high. But there is hope. Today, actors like Elliot Page, Zendaya, Florence Pugh, and Michaela Jaé Rodriguez are demanding the right to tell their own stories, to be cast authentically, to speak openly, to exist fully. The old machinery is rusting. The contracts are looser. The public is more aware. Yet the ghosts of the past remain a reminder that fame is not freedom. It is often a gilded cage. So, when we watch an old film or scroll through a celebrity's Instagram, let us remember, behind every smile, there may be a story never told. Behind every performance, a self that was hidden. And behind every icon, a human being who just wanted to be seen not as a product, not as a fantasy, but as they truly were. That is the real Hollywood story. Not the glamour, but the courage it took to survive it.